Chapter 1466 Extra, Dang Shentong 6. The fire dragon surged forward, and there was no longer any space to hide inside the carriage. Dang Shentong put away his gun and drew his sword. White light flickered on the surface of his body. Holy body blessing. Facing the fire dragon, he slashed his sword directly down, and the fire dragon was split in two from the center, rushing out of the carriage. When that wandering soul saw this, a look of horror appeared on his face, but then it turned into viciousness. He clenched his fists, his skin gradually becoming blood red, and when he opened his mouth, he spat out a ball of red-colored flames. The interior of the carriage all began to deform because of this blazing temperature. Dang Shentong's face did not have any expression on it, and he still steadily stepped forward. One moment he was engulfed in flames. The next moment, he killed out from amongst the flames, and with a cold point, the tip of his longsword erupted with a cold light, directly penetrating through the head. The luster in the eyes of that wandering soul slowly disappeared and fell to the floor of the carriage. Dang Shentong raised his head to look ahead, where a dozen wandering souls were waiting for him to pass by as if they were enemies. A level B mission, what exactly do we need to escort? Dang Shentong's mind thought so calmly. It wasn't a problem that was too troublesome, it was just that he was still thinking of resolving this side of the matter as soon as possible before going to eliminate that mutant codenamed Sprite. Let's make it quick. Dang Shentong stepped forward. The supernatural energy erupted in the middle of the carriage, followed by a shocking force that shattered the bulletproof glass of the car windows. Bang! 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 The carriage made of special alloy was twisted and distorted, imprinting the shape of a human body. Dang Shentong swiftly passed through the long carriages. The inside of the carriages were already filled with blood, the silver longsword was pointing at the floor, the blood dripped down drop by drop, but surprisingly, it didn't leave the slightest bit of it on top of the sword body. Boom! He kicked over the thick alloy doors in front of him, and at the end of the carriage, Scarface was holding a large spray gun aimed at him. Dang Shentong just calmly glanced at the gun in his hand, then said indifferently, "This kind of thing, do you think it's useful to me?" In Jiangnan region, weapons and ammunition that were exclusive to mutants were monopolized by Blizzard City. Other than the region's certified mutants, it was a felony for anyone else to get hold of weapons used against mutants. And ordinary weapons and ammunition were not even small stones to scratch an itch against a high-level mutant. Not everyone was Zhang Yi, having a genius-level mechanic like Lupan to build arms for him. Scarface sneered and threw the sprayer in his hand aside. "Are you the Heavenly God Squad's captain, Dang Shentong? I've heard of your name a long time ago. Let me try to see how much weight you have today." As soon as the words left his mouth, his right hand was placed on the wall of the carriage. In the next moment, the entire carriage was completely covered in sharp cold ice, and dense icefront spikes invaded towards Dang Shentong. Dang Shentong's footsteps did not stop for a moment, the holy body blessing's power formed a bright holy ring around him, and he walked directly towards the frost storm with barbed spikes like a monster's mouthpiece. Those sharp ice barbs met his holy light and collapsed at the touch of a button, making it difficult to get close to his body at all. Clatter dash, the ice shattered, and Scarface's face revealed a grave and dismayed expression. He knew that Blizzard City's captain was strong, but as the king of the snow plain wandering souls, he had never imagined that the gap between them would be so huge. Withdrawal. The first time such a thought flashed in his mind, so his fox-like figure swiftly swept backward, quickly arriving at the edge of the carriage. His right hand was placed on top of the carriage, and frost quickly covered the joints of the carriage, to separate this carriage from the front and throw Dang Shentong down. However, the next moment, a white light flashed in front of his eyes, and a tiny point of light in his pupil quickly enlarged in front of his eyes, finally transforming into a point of sharp sword tip. In the middle of Scarface's mind, walking lights all appeared at this moment, the crisis of death enveloped him completely. Boom! From his body, raging ice-blue frost and snowstorms surged out crazily, intercepting the center between him and the duo of Dang Shentong. The powerful supernatural power even set off a violent blizzard above the snowy plains. However, this terrifying power only slowed Deng Shentong's speed for an instant. But it was only an instant. The silver-colored holy light exploded, melting his biting frost like the blazing sun melting the spring snow, and then stabbed a sword into his chest. Scarface looked down at his chest in dismay. The longsword had already missed half of it, penetrating his entire being. Is this the strength of the captain of Blizzard City? The insubordinates, who were not affiliated with official organizations, or who had some cooperation with official organizations, did not have much of a concept of the supernatural ability index. They only had a rough idea of the general leveling of supernatural abilities. So Scarface rightfully thought that he was a Delta-level mutant and the Lord of Wandering Souls who had crisscrossed the snowy plains, so he deserved to be strong, and not too far behind the captain-level characters of Blizzard City. Until the moment before his death, he did not see clearly the gap between himself and the captain level. Deng Shentong drew out his sword with a gui. Deng Shentong pulled out his longsword, and the moment his blood hit the ground, it condensed into black and red ice shards. His eyes looked ahead, and out of instinct, he sensed a powerful aura waiting for him. Among the wandering souls, is there even such an existence? Deng Shentong frowned. After the Great Mutation era came, there were more and more mutants in this world. There were even some existences independent of Blizzard City that possessed captain-level strength. Zhang Yi, for example, was a most miraculous existence. But there wasn't just one Zhang Yi in this world. Everyone who survived needed to fight to the best of their ability to live. Playing hard to kill for any little resource. It was like raising a parasite, eliminating the weak and surviving the strong mutants. Deng Shentong was not negligent in any way, and in a split second, he exploded his supernatural oracle bright salute. Holy light began to erupt with him at the center, quickly engulfing the entire train. Where both eyes were visible, there was only light. This was Deng Shentong's ability to manipulate light and deprive people of their sight. But the moment he released his ability, a tiny cracking sound came from behind the alloy doors, breaking through the thick alloy doors and shooting towards his body. Deng Shentong's pupil shrunk slightly, his eyes filled with dismay. A mutant releasing supernatural energy was like breathing. At that moment there would be a short gap in the body, a time when there would be a subtle loophole in the duel of concentration and supernatural energy. The enemy in the middle of the carriage, however, had keenly captured this gap. He had been waiting for Deng Shentong to strike first, and then waited for the opportunity to act. Deng Shentong's legs were firmly set on the ground, and his upper body quickly leaned back, dodging the oncoming bullet in an ironclad position. The bullet broke a vacuum in the air and ran through the carriage from behind, silently devouring everything in its path. Chapter 1467 Extra, Deng Shentong 7. Deng Shentong's body quickly returned to its original shape, and instead of rushing into the middle of the carriage, he quickly leapt high up to the top of the carriage. Because he had realized that the other party was a strong rider. If he fought in a narrow environment like the carriage, it would be more favorable to his opponent's performance. Therefore, it was necessary to come to an open area. The top of the carriage was undoubtedly the best choice. The two of them were separated by the carriage, but in reality, neither of them could see each other's shadows. Inside the carriage, Rabid Dog's eyes were clear. He couldn't see anything, but he was calmly loading his pistol with bullets. In the corner of the compartment, the young girl Amber hugged her knees and curled up into a ball, but she was indifferent to the killing outside the compartment. It seemed that she had already gotten used to this kind of death and fighting. Rabid Dog raised his gun and pulled the trigger directly at the carriage overhead. The feeling of danger striking caused Deng Shentong to panic and dodge back. However, the bullet followed him like a shadow, as if it could lock onto his position. Deng Shentong drew his sword in front of him, and a bullet accurately hit the sword. The powerful force shook Deng Shentong's right hand. His pupil shrunk violently, realizing that it was surprisingly difficult for him to block the other party's bullet by his body's strength. Pa! The bullet was flicked out by Dang Shentong's force, but his figure also took 5 or 6 steps back on the carriage before he managed to stop. His eyes became icy cold, his right hand reversed the blade of his sword, powerful supernatural energy erupted from him, and his long silver hair was windless. He intended to directly slash the carriage in front of him with his sword, forcing the other party to have to show up and fight with himself. But just at this time, the window of the carriage in front of him suddenly opened, and a black figure tumbled out from it, swiftly swept to the top of the carriage, and stared at Dang Shentong from a distance of more than 10 meters. Bright salute, it's really been a long time since I've seen this kind of ability. The middle-aged man with a large beard exclaimed, showing a faint smile towards Dang Shentong. His eyes were hollow, as there was no light in his eyes at this moment. However, as a top-notch archer, without eyes, he still had other ways to perceive everything around him. When Dang Shentong saw the man in front of him, he couldn't help but take a deep breath before his gaze became grave. How is it you? Lupan. After the end of the world, Blizzard City had always been absorbing outstanding mutants from the outside world. But likewise, there were also mutants who had defected from Blizzard City. It was just that not everyone was like Gao Changkong, who dared to directly challenge the supreme authority of Blizzard City. Most defectors left Blizzard City and then lived as insubordinates. This world was not one of ease, and Blizzard City was not exactly a happy place. After the problem of energy was solved, it allowed Blizzard City to feed more people, yet the stratification of society and the difficulties of the people at the bottom remained. Even the mutants, the situation they had to face, could be even worse. This could be seen from the fact that Zhu Jing had used mutants as consumables to boost his strength for Yuan Kongyue. Lupan, on the other hand, was once a captain-level figure in Blizzard City. Facing Dang Shentong's questioning, Lupan just shrugged. Why can't it be me? Ever since I left that huge prison in Blizzard City, I knew that sooner or later I would meet you guys one day. I just didn't expect that this day would come so quickly. Dang Shentong took a deep breath and did not continue to say anything more. It was already pointless to persuade him to surrender, as he knew what Blizzard City's attitude towards traitors was, and going back would only lead to death. He put his long sword away, then slowly pulled out his black pistol. Seeing this, Lupan laughed. You want to duel with me with a gun? Don't forget that I taught you your gun skills back then. Of course Dang Shentong remembered. This was because Lupan was once the best gunplay instructor of the Blizzard City Guards. Using a gun is the last respect for you. Dang Shentong looked at him and said indifferently. After all, once upon a time, I had to honor you as a teacher. Facing a gunplay expert of this level, Dang Shentong understood that it would be difficult for him to get close to his opponent's body with his sword. As for gunplay, he was confident that he would not be weaker than anyone else. What's more, this wasn't a mere gunplay duel, but a duel between mutants. Bright salute deprived the opponent of his visual ability. Even though he could rely on senselessness, Lupan was unable to fully achieve the same level of vision with the naked eye. So Dang Shentong had already grabbed a partial head start by utilizing his ability. He raised his pistol and removed the clip in front of Lupan, then retired the bullets one by one. Lupan changed color slightly. This was how he taught Dang Shentong when he taught him marksmanship many years ago. A duel between gunmen. Very good, looks like you haven't forgotten what I taught you. Lupan made the same move as Dang Shentong. The duo retired all the bullets in their magazines, and threw all the other guns and ammunition on their bodies off the train. In the end, only 5 bullets remained in the duo's hands. Kata! Dang Shentong pressed the 5 bullets into the middle of the magazine, then stuffed them into the pistol, loaded it, and finally inserted the gun inside the holster. On the opposite side of him, Lupan completed such an action one step ahead of him. Dang Shentong, you count. Lupan said. Dang Shentong nodded. The duo stood at the top of the rapidly moving train, blowing in the bitterly cold wind. Even the wind and snow couldn't make their bodies shake in the slightest. The duo's hands were in a state of release, with their right hands right next to their pistols, ready to be drawn and fired at any time. Deng Shentong adjusted his breathing and heartbeat. 3, 2, 1. At the count of 1, the duo reached out and drew their guns at almost the same time, the two stubby pistols aiming at each other's heads coincidentally. Be sure to demand a fatal blow. Bang! The special origin bullets used by Deng Shentong were wrapped in holy light, slicing through the air in a silver beam that broke through the air. Lupan's bullet was black, not knowing what special material it was made from, but it formed a vacuum field in the air, stirring up the wind and snow that filled the sky. In just a split second, the two bullets unexpectedly collided hard in mid-air. The head of the bullet instantly deflated, and the powerful collision of the supernatural energy caused a powerful storm that fiercely stirred away with the train as the center. A ring-shaped ice and snow wall tens of meters high was formed around the train. When he failed to score a hit, Lupan's figure suddenly flashed, and while quickly crouching down, he fired 2 more shots at Deng Shentong's left chest and abdomen like lightning. His right foot stepped on the top of the carriage like a cheetah, ready to dodge Deng Shentong's bullets at any time. Chapter 1468 Extra, Deng Shentong 8. Lupan's gun was too fast. Even though he hadn't experienced it for a long time, this time Deng Shentong still felt a powerful crisis. The light of holy body blessing shone like a solid armor on the surface of his body, and he flexibly twisted his body to deflect the vitals that the bullet might strike. The blow to his left chest was dodged, but he was still shot in the waist. The pitch-black bullet stirred open a layer of invisible power when it hit his body, and even with the holy body blessing, and the shelter of his combat suit, he still felt intense pain. Humph! A wisp of blood spilled out from the corner of his mouth, but he forced himself to endure the intensity and shot 2 bullets at Lupan as well. Lupan was more experienced than him, and when Deng Shentong raised his hand he had already dodged to the side and back in a Z-shaped flash. The first bullet was easily dodged by him. The second bullet passed in front of his doors, and Lupan's mouth revealed a triumphant smile. However, just then, the bullet unexpectedly exploded in front of him. A powerful impact rushed towards his doors, surprisingly lifting him directly off the top of the carriage. Lupan, times have changed. Deng Shentong said coldly. Deng's technology standard was the world's leading level, and in the field of supernatural abilities, unable to break through the boundaries of Epsilon, they took another route and began to frantically research weapons. The special bullet that Deng Shentong used could be used by him to actively detonate the explosives loaded in the bullet with his supernatural energy. Lupan didn't fall from the train, and at the last moment, he firmly grasped the edge of the carriage with one hand. Then with a forceful fling, the person floated down behind Deng Shentong. While he was still in mid-air, he fired a shot at the back of Deng Shentong's head. Deng Shentong did not hesitate to turn around and shoot. Once again, the 2 bullets collided together in mid-air, and the terrifying burst of energy caused the 2 of them to pull apart and look at each other cautiously. 5 bullets, now only the last one remained. Neither of the 2 dared to act rashly. If this bullet couldn't take away the other's life, perhaps they themselves would be greeted with death. Deng Shentong took a deep breath and exhaled a thick white mist. Rumble. The train raced swiftly towards the front on the ice field. No one was driving, but the AI system was moving towards the distant Blizzard City according to the original plan. This was something Lupan knew very well in his heart. Perhaps before long, they would encounter reinforcements from Blizzard City, because in Lupan's impression, the captain of the investigation unit never acted alone. So the longer time dragged on, the more unfavorable it would be for him. Thinking of this, he made a decisive move, raising his gun to Deng Shentong's head and pulling the trigger in his hand. Deng Shentong was always watching his movements, and the moment Lupan struck, he also struck decisively. If both of their guns didn't have bullets inside, then in close combat, Deng Shentong was more adept. However, when the bullet discharged, Deng Shentong's eyes revealed a look of dismay. Lupan had indeed pulled the trigger, but no bullet had been fired from the chamber of his gun. An instant later, pfft, the sound came. Lupan used his left arm to block Gao Changkong's bullet, and his entire arm was directly ripped off by the high-energy bullet. The moment he shot the gun, he had made all the plans. Although one arm was ruined, he looked at Deng Shentong and the corner of his mouth raised a smug smile. He then opened the magazine with one hand and opened his mouth to spit out a silver light. The last bullet was not loaded in the magazine, but in his mouth. Now I have an extra bullet. Lupan looked at Deng Shentong. Although his left hand was ruined, his right hand holding the gun was still terribly stable. Take a guess, can you block this shot? Deng Shentong was silent. On this high-speed moving train, the top was very smooth, and the space to dodge was extremely limited. Really wanting to dodge this bullet was not a difficult task. As long as he jumped off the carriage he could do it. But for a gunman, that would be tantamount to actively admitting defeat. He was not Zhang Yi, he had his own pride that did not allow him to do that. However, his holy body blessing in combat suit had already suffered a huge reduction in defense after taking a frontal impact. If his body was shot again, as long as he was shot in the torso part, he would die for sure. The terrifying power contained within the bullet would completely tear apart his internal organs the moment it entered his torso. Lupan gazed at Deng Shentong and smiled. It's not too late for you to escape. Deng Shentong smiled back. Last bullet, if you can't kill me, you'll die. Lupan, Deng Shentong, you are too confident. Deng Shentong, let me guess, you'll hit me in the head. Lupan sneered, no, I prefer to hit your chest. As soon as he said that, the bullet had already shot out of Lupan's gun with a bang. The bullet had already shot out from the muzzle of Judge Lu's gun with a bang. The last bullet, which also contained Lupan's most powerful attack, came straight at Deng Shentong's chest just as he said. Just when Lupan thought he was going to win, the silver-colored combat suit on Deng Shentong's body suddenly cracked, and a piece of dark silver-colored metal popped out from his chest. Ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. The dark silver metal quickly cracked, then turned into a thin metal shield in front of him. Bang! The bullet impacted hard on the metal shield, directly denting that metal shield made of Edelman alloys so deeply that it was almost penetrated. Lupan's eyes appeared stunned for a split second, and right at this moment, an engine roar suddenly sounded beside him. That Deng Shentong's vehicle, the Snow Metro Wolf, unexpectedly drove alongside the train before firing a dozen or so flying bullets at Lupan. Lupan had just sent out the strongest blow. His body was empty, although he tried his best to dodge, but he was still hit by the flying bullets, and was thrown off the train fiercely. Deng Shentong stood on top of the train, coldly looking at the former division commander. Now the rebel is getting farther and farther away from himself. He did not choose to get off the train to chase after him, but only covered his right hand over the right side of his belly that had been hit by the bullet. The inside of his body had been damaged, and he let the combat suit inject his body with drugs before jumping to the connection of the carriage. He wanted to see what exactly the escort for the Level B mission was. Deng Shentong reached out and yanked hard, directly tearing open the thick alloy doors. In the corner of the train that was whistling ahead, a young girl in a white down jacket was cowering in a ball, and underneath the white brim of her hat, a pair of large eyes looked at him blankly. Deng Shentong's eyes were a bit dismayed as he looked around and nothing else existed. He then confirmed with the Blizzard City side once again. What exactly is the escort for this Level B mission? It's a person. A mutant suspected of possessing special abilities. Chapter 1469 Extra, Deng Shentong 9. Among the information given to Deng Shentong by Blizzard City, there was no indication that the escort was a mutant with any kind of ability. It was only half a month ago that their patrol team discovered a young girl who had escaped from the Sprite territory during the course of their mission. According to our information, she was the Sprite's attendant and had been following the Sprite around. However, when we found her, we didn't find any attack attribute abilities from her body. Hence, it was just sent back to bring it back for research. Deng Shentong looked at the soft girl while talking. Her face had an unusual pallor, and her long hair fell like a waterfall, covering half of her face. But for some unknown reason, the moment he saw her, an impulse to protect her arose within Deng Shentong. It seemed that her softness could inspire the most instinctive protective desire within a person. Deng Shentong didn't get the exact information, but by the looks of it, she should have fled from amongst the sprites' territory. These wandering souls were hired by the sprites to capture her. The sprites and demons were precisely the target of Deng Shentong's mission on this trip. Deng Shentong felt compassion for the young girl. He walked over to Amber's body, crouched down and revealed a bright smile. "Don't be afraid, you are safe now." He extended his right hand towards Amber. "I am the investigation team captain of Blizzard City. My name is Deng Shentong." Amber looked at the gentle and handsome man in front of her, and a bright light gradually emerged in her eyes. She gently placed her hand in his palm. "Amber." She spoke her name. Deng Shentong looked at the somewhat thin clothing on her body, which seemed to be somewhat insufficient to withstand the cold in the middle of such a cold environment. So he directly mobilized the intelligence system, and soon the Snow Metro Wolf caught up with the train. Deng Shentong stopped the train, then opened the reserve compartment on the side of the Snow Metro Wolf and took out the spare combat uniform and handed it to her to put on. "You escaped from the sprites' territory, didn't you?" he inquired gently as he handed Amber a compressed food, sounding like a doting father loving his daughter. Amber very naturally took the food and ate it, not suspecting for a moment that the man in front of her would hurt her. Even when facing the vicious bandits of the Wandering Souls, she did not show any fear. However, when she heard the name Sprites, her body stiffened and the food in her hand almost fell to the ground. Seeing this, Deng Shentong already understood everything in his heart. From the looks of it, it is indeed a poor girl who escaped from the sprites' territory. Deng Shentong said secretly in his heart. The sprites, the most powerful lords in this area, currently clearly possessed captain-level strength of insubordinates. Even Blizzard City was easily unwilling to clash with it. It wasn't that it didn't have enough power, but it was because throughout the Jiangnan region, aside from the 13 main cities controlled in the hands of Blizzard City, other vast regions still existed with large and small forces. With Blizzard City's power alone, it simply couldn't do anything to cleanse the entire region. The area of Huashu Kingdom was simply too vast. And after the Great Mutation era came, some extremely gifted mutants had appeared among the insubordinates in the outside world. Even if they did not possess the quality resources of Blizzard City, they grew up quickly. Zhang Yi was an example, but not the only one. The train stopped on the desolate and huge snow plain, and Amber sat on the door frame of the carriage, quietly eating. Deng Shentong stood next to her, gently watching her eat. For some reason, seeing her always touched the softest piece of his heart. "Can you tell me a little bit about you?" Amber swallowed her food as Deng Shentong handed over the thermos and she took another big gulp of hot water. "You're going after the sprites?" she asked, staring at Deng Shentong, her voice calm with even a hint of coldness in it. "Not bad." Deng Shentong nodded. Amber, however, lowered her head. "I advise you that it's best if you don't go over there to die. No one can kill him." Deng Shentong shrugged and smiled. "That's because you haven't seen someone like me." He knew that the sprite was a very powerful insubordinate. Among Blizzard City's intelligence, there was a certain record of that fellow. It was a very powerful and extremely cautious mutant. The place where he lived was a huge frozen swamp, which the sprites called the Ice Flower Swamp. He would never leave that swamp, for it was a fortress that he had built tightly. No mutant who violated it rashly ever made it out alive. The reason why he was wanted by Blizzard City was because half a month ago, a Blizzard City patrol mistakenly entered it, and then were all killed by the sprites. In a duel between mutants, there were several main factors that determined victory or defeat. First, attributes. Once an attribute was restrained, even if the ability's supernatural ability index was more powerful, it might not be able to win. For example, Zhang Yi's temporal and spatial supernatural ability was an absolute restraint for a purely physical mutant. Secondly, the supernatural ability index. In the case where there was no obvious restraint and their ability attributes and the combat conditions were the same, the higher the supernatural ability index, the more powerful the ability was and the easier it was to win. Third, combat conditions. This is an extremely important and complex condition. It included intelligence knowledge of the enemy's abilities, and whether or not they were fighting in a venue that suited them. Ice and snow-type mutants fight on ice, flame-type mutants fight in the jungle, rules category mutants lay traps like spiders, and reinforcement-type mutants fight to the death in open space. The environment is also extremely crucial to the battle. Fourth, it was pure luck. The reason why the Sprite was so difficult to deal with, and even to find it as the target of an A-level mission, was because he not only possessed great strength, but also never left his territory. Whoever stepped into it, the above 4 prerequisites, or at least the most important third one, would have been lost. However, Deng Shentong remained confident in himself. There was no other reason, simply because he was Deng Shentong. Amber was surprised by Deng Shentong's confidence. She thought for a moment, lowered her head and said, "I did escape from there." But she was silent for a moment and shook her head. "I can't imagine the image of you defeating the sprites." Deng Shentong shrugged helplessly, and was not surprised in his heart. Among his contact with Amber, he did not find anything too abnormal about this girl. Other than one very subtle feeling, everything else indicated that this girl was not a mutant with strong fighting abilities. "I understand, you must be very afraid of sprites, right?" Deng Shentong looked ahead as Snow Metro Wolf slowly came to the two of them. Deng Shentong said to her, "I have to go and conquer the sprites now, so you can ride on this chariot. It will carry you safely back to Blizzard City." Chapter 1470 Extra, Deng Shentong X. Deng Shentong planned to let Amber return to Blizzard City first, while he continued on to the Ice Flower Swamp to conquer the sprites. Amber twisted her head to look at Deng Shentong. Her eyes were large and deep with an amber color. After thinking for a moment, she suddenly said in a cool voice, "I can take you there." Deng Shentong looked at her with some surprise. "Aren't you afraid?" Amber said indifferently, "I am not afraid. Because no one will hurt me." When she said this, she suddenly smiled sweetly, and that smile was as warm as sunshine, shining in Deng Shentong's heart. It made his prodigal son's heart flutter for a long time. Deng Shentong waited for her to finish eating, then he wrapped one arm around her waist and placed her on the back seat of the Snow Metro Wolf. He then helped Amber put on her helmet and said to her, "Sit firmly. There's a lot of wind and snow, so be careful not to get blown off." Amber sniffed and wrapped her hands directly around his sturdy waist. Snow Metro Wolf activated, and the intelligence system automatically connected to the Nebula satellite system for navigation, marking the location of the Ice Blossom Swamp, and then set off in that direction. Half a day later, they arrived at the Ice Flower Swamp. Even from a long distance away, one could see the abnormalities of this place. There were no snowflakes falling on the ground, and the entire land was a piece of crystal-clear cold ice. In midair, messy snowflakes flew, covering the area in front of them for tens of kilometers. This was something that a vice-captain level ice and snow mutant could also do, so Deng Shentong didn't feel how amazing it was. Instead of rashly barging in with his motorcycle, he got out of the car, and Amber jumped out with him. "Do you want to go over with me?" Deng Shentong said as he looked at her. Amber nodded and didn't say anything. Deng Shentong's eyes flashed with a flash of color as he left the motorcycle outside the Ice Flower Swamp and took his own weapons and ammunition out of the reserve bin and stuffed them onto his body. After thinking about it, he also handed Amber a small silver pistol. "Keep this for your defense." Amber took the pistol, then stuffed it into her pocket. Deng Shentong pressed his sword and walked step by step towards the middle of the Ice Flower Swamp. Amber, on the other hand, followed him step by step. The huge ice swamp was as flat as a mirror. The duo's footsteps stepped over the ice surface one after another, while underneath the thick ice surface, a pair of huge eyes opened indifferently, sweeping over the two tiny humans on the ice surface. Soon, one pair of huge eyes after another lit up in the middle of the dark swamp. The cold lake water beneath the surface of the ice surged, and a huge and terrifying body silently approached towards the area where the two were. As if Deng Shentong was oblivious, he continued to press his sword as he traveled forward. He couldn't clearly see the road ahead in the blizzard, but the nebula system high in the sky showed him the best path. The two of them did not know how long they had been traveling, but suddenly, Amber stopped in her tracks. Deng Shentong looked back at her after taking a few steps forward. Amber had her hands in the pockets of her combat uniform, half of her face hidden under the hood, and was just looking at him quietly. "You're not the first Blizzard City soldier to come here. Everyone who came before you did is dead. I warned you, you're the one who didn't listen, it's not my fault." Deng Shentong smiled curiously. "Of course I won't blame you. I was the one who wanted to come." Amber took a step back. Suddenly, the thick ice surface between her and Deng Shentong exploded. Boom! The ice surface, which was more than 10 meters thick, was unexpectedly broken through from below in an instant, and the roiling ice smashed over towards Deng Shentong like a boulder. Deng Shentong's gaze was clear and cold as he looked at everything in front of him, his left hand opened forward, and white light began to start shining with himself as the center. The bright salute formed a huge circle of shields, wrapping his entire person in it, and the huge blocks of ice were all blocked. But the next moment, Deng Shentong's feet collapsed violently. His gaze sank slightly, only to see that a huge shadow suddenly appeared on the ice below him, enveloping the area beneath his entire person. Ka-ching! The thick ice left like glass, and an immense and incomparable mouthpiece appeared underneath Deng Shentong's feet, filled with hideous barbed teeth, like a terrifying abyss swooping towards Deng Shentong. Ka-ching! A hideous and thick and long mouth closed in midair, more than a dozen meters long. The thick brown skin was like armor, allowing people to generate fear from the bottom of their hearts after seeing it. Not far away, Amber watched this scene without much fluctuation in her eyes. "I warned you. It's a pity that you're too confident in your own strength. You're always going to die anyway, so why don't you just help me out?" The huge monster's body slowly sank, and its appearance was only then vaguely visible. It was surprisingly a giant crocodile that was over 30 meters long. And in its surroundings, huge shadows had long since covered the area within hundreds of meters, so it was clear that there wasn't just one such monster. Amber stood still, but was not the least bit afraid of them attacking her, and those crocodiles didn't look like they were going to attack Amber either. Amber took a deep breath and inwardly mourned the beautiful man she had only met once. But just as she was about to head to the center of the ice blossom swamp to tell the sprites off, a bitter white light shot up from beneath the ice. Poof! The solid ice was interspersed with a huge wave that rushed into the sky, as well as a rain of blood that surged high into the air. Deng Shentong, who had just been swallowed by the giant crocodile, was shrouded in holy white light as he slowly landed on top of the ice, and he looked down at the group of crocodiles in the ice blossom swamp at his feet, without the slightest bit of fear in his eyes. These are the monsters raised by the sprites. Below the captain level, trying to deal with these guys will be very tricky, I'm afraid. The dead giant crocodile corpses quickly ushered in other giant crocodiles to fight over them, but more giant crocodiles chose to break through the ice and attack Deng Shentong. Boom! 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 Obviously, the solid ice was more than 10 meters thick, but it was as if it was made of paper in front of them. Huge mouthparts scrambled to bite at Deng Shentong, and from the ice holes crawled out tens of meters long, as terrifying as prehistoric monsters, crawling swiftly on all 4 feet as they rushed towards Deng Shentong. Facing the siege of these giant beasts, Deng Shentong raised the longsword in his hand, and an even more powerful holy light erupted from his body like a round of sun, illuminating the entire ice flower swamp. Blind world. All the surrounding creatures were all deprived of their vision in this instant. Even ferocious beasts would panic with their hands and feet as they became blind. Amber looked at the blind world in front of her in surprise, and for the first time, her inner mind began to panic a little. Soon, the sound of cloth being torn echoed in her ears, one after the other. By the time her eyes regained clarity, all she could see in front of her eyes was a scene like the sure hell. Those mutant giant crocodiles as huge as small mountains had their corpses stacked on top of each other in a bloody mess, while the ice and swamp under her feet had long since been drenched in a crimson color by a large amount of blood.